Hello, and welcome to the next part of our Chapter a Day series working through the book of Genesis. If you've been with us, we've been on a journey over the last couple chapters following Jacob, the grandson of Abraham. Jacob, who had to flee from his own home because he had tricked and deceived and manipulated his twin brother and his father in order to get the birthright and the blessing, the promises of God. We encountered a point where Jacob actually meets with God, and God tells him that he is giving him the promise of his father and his grandfather. We then see how Jacob meets up with Laban, his uncle, and all that Jacob has done thus far to try to give himself the best. Now he meets someone who is even more deceptive and manipulative than he is. And for the first time, he's experiencing what happens on the human plane when he doesn't seek God first. We heard about how he ended up with two wives, with Leah that he did not love, and with Rachel that he did. And we are now seeing what is happening in that family dynamic as children are beginning to be born. The end of last chapter, we saw that Leah, the one who was not loved by her father, not loved by her husband, yet God heard her and the Lord was for her, and how Leah was given Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. So let's enter into the chapter now, chapter 30. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her, so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her." So here is the situation that we have. We know from last chapter that, of course, Jacob prefers Rachel. He chooses her. He doesn't choose Leah. But the Lord has blessed Leah with children. So now Rachel comes to Jacob and it's like, "Jacob, give me children. Jacob, this is your fault. I am now being despised because you have had children with Leah. Why is it not working with me?" And it's interesting here because we don't see Rachel immediately calling upon the Lord. Jacob does mention the Lord, but it's like, "Hey, this isn't my fault. This is the Lord's business. This is between you and the Lord. This isn't my business. I'm obviously able to have children because I've had children with Leah." So what we see happening here is now Rachel is thinking human means. We've seen this before. We see patterns of human behavior again and again. So Rachel's human means to deal with this problem of not having descendants for her husband says, "This is what we're going to do. I have a personal servant." We saw it mentioned in the previous chapter, Bilhah. So she is now going to be my surrogate. So you will have sexual relations with her, and any children that she has automatically become mine. So let's see what happens. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore, she called his name Dan. So we have Bilhah here. on behalf of Rachel, gives birth to Dan, which sounds in Hebrew like judged. Verse 7, Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali, which means wrestling. What's interesting here is hearing Rachel's response. Ha! I am now ahead of Leah. The only thing that could cause my husband to look more fondly toward Leah and less fondly toward me was because I haven't produced sons for him. Well, thanks to my human means, thanks to Bilhah as a secondary wife, as a surrogate, now I've had 2 sons, so now there's no reason why my husband won't favor me over Leah. We get a picture into Rachel's character, because at first, remember I said we often view it as the perfect love story. Here's this beautiful woman, here's this young man who will work so hard, 7 years, another 7 years, 14 years just for her. And yet she despises her sister. Even though she's the favorite, she despises her sister. Even though she knows that Jacob always comes to her, she's looking for a way to prevail over her sister, to take anything away from her sister. It's an interesting picture here. Verse 9, when Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. So now we have Leah feeling the threat. So now Leah is also going to go to human means. Even though she's seen how the Lord has worked. When Judah was born, she gave praise to the Lord because the Lord was for her. But now as this conflict continues, now we have another person into the situation. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, good fortune has come. So she called his name Gad, which sounds in Hebrew like good fortune. So now we have Zilpah. Leah's servant Zilpah, verse 12, bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, happy am I, for women have called me happy. So she called his name Asher, which sounds like happy in Hebrew. So now we have Leah's 4 sons that she was able to give birth to. We have Bilhah's 2 sons, which are in the name of Rachel. So in the name of Rachel. Now we have Zilpah's 2 sons in the name of Leah. Let's continue on. Verse 14, in the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But Leah said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes too? Now we may be wondering what's happening here, besides a picture of the intensity of the rivalry and the pain that we see in this relationship. So we have the mandrakes, a plant which was thought to have medicinal properties, a plant that was believed in a lot of ancient culture that taking this plant and preparing it and taking it as a medicinal herb had the ability to enable fertility. So it was thought to have fertility powers. So you see what's happening here. You have one of Leah's sons has found this plant. He's brought it back to Leah. Rachel's heard about it and she's thinking, oh, with this, I could possibly be able to conceive and have children myself, which would again improve my status with Jacob, even though her status is already the preferred status. So you see this, like Rachel's like, oh, you've got this. Well, here, give it to me. Going to Leah and saying, give it to me, knowing, and Leah knowing what would be the reason she would want this. And we see Leah's response. Remember, real people encountering a real God in real time. She says, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you also take my son's mandrakes also? So we see the pain of Leah's heart. Even in all that she's been learning and what God's, there's still the raw pain of Leah's heart. Is it a little thing that you took my husband? Of course, it's not a little thing. She goes, and now you want these because you want to improve your status even more over me. That's what you want. So now Leah uses her pain to her advantage. Rachel says, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. Like, okay, so you want to spend time with your husband? Great. You can have him tonight. So we get the sense that the majority of the time, Leah probably has Jacob's attention. And she's condescending to let Leah spend time with Jacob. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. You think of how strange, how hard that must be. That here's Leah, Jacob's first wife, having to come up to him and say, look, I made an arrangement, so tonight you need to be physically intimate with me. I've actually bought time with you. And we see just the mess of our human condition. And what do we see happen? So he lay with her that night, in verse 17, and God listened to Leah. And she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, God has given me my wages, because I gave my servant to my husband. So she called his name Issachar, which means wages. Notice that it is Leah we hear who is crying out to the Lord. She says, it says in verse 17, and God listened to Leah. So Leah, in her brokenness, cries out to the Lord. We don't hear this at first from Rachel. We're watching Rachel's journey as well. And Leah conceived again, verse 19, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun, which means or sounds in Hebrew like honor. And then she had a daughter as well, Dinah. And it's interesting to see this. At this point, when Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah are born, we see a change in Leah's language. You notice she no longer says, now my husband will love me. It's now my husband will honor me. My husband will honor me for my part in the promise. My husband will honor me for my part of producing offspring for his name and for his line. She's not asking love from Jacob anymore. But she does believe that she will be honored. And then we see God now at work in Rachel. Verse 22, then the Lord remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, May the Lord add to me another son. So now she has, over here we see a son of her own. The first son from her. And it's interesting, may the Lord add to me another son. It's her way of saying, thank you for Joseph. Thank you for this, but can there be more? Not just this one. Can there be more? Can you add to me more sons? More than what I have through Bilhah? Can you add more to me? There's much in this of seeing the Lord's hand at work and seeing the dynamics of the relationship here of the people, of seeing the symbols in the names of how people are understanding God, how they're grappling with God. Now we come to the next part. We shift gears here to an interesting story. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, Send me away, that I might go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Jacob said to him, You yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? So we come to this turning point now in the story. Jacob is feeling the call to go home. His family has become established. His wives have had children. None of them at the present moment are with child. And he's looking at it thinking, this is a good time for us to make the long journey back to my father's country. Much time has passed. Over 14 years have passed now. And he's like, this is time for us to go home. But when he says this to Laban, we begin to see again, we have Laban at work. So Jacob wants to go home. Laban said to him, If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination. So he said, I have learned by secretive ways. I have learned through the religious practices, the mystical practices of my culture. I have learned by looking at the signs that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages and I will give it. So at first, Laban seems to be, he's like, I know that I have benefited because of you. Like, what do you want? You're going to leave now. What do you expect from me for your time with me? What do you expect? And it's interesting because Laban says, by secretive means, by divination, by reading the signs, I know that the Lord has blessed me because of you. And I like Jacob's response. You yourself know how I have served you and how your livestock has fared with me. You had little before I came, and it's increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? So Jacob's saying, look, yeah, I know you benefited from me being here. But now I have to go and I have to build my own household. I have to start putting my energies into providing for my own household. I need to start doing that now. For 14 years, everything I've done other than paying for my wives has been to benefit you, and you've done very well. So it's almost like Jacob is trying to say to Laban, so now it's time for me to start my own household. What are you going to give me? How are you going to benefit me? And Laban's like, well, I know that I've benefited greatly from you with the sense that if you continue here, that I'll continue to benefit. We see the two of them trying to play each other. He said, what shall I give you? Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty shall answer for me later, when you come to look into my wages with you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. So, we have this plan. How do we work out wages? So I'll stay with you a little while, and we can work out a way that you can provide me wages, something for me to take to provide and to start building for my household. So it's the question of wages. So Jacob comes up with a plan. Jacob says, give me all the spotted sheep and goats. Anything that's spotted or speckled or black. That'll be mine. And that way, if you look as time goes on, there are any sheep or goats that are born or are part of my flock that aren't spotted, speckled, or black, then they have to be yours. So I can only have these ones. I can take them out of the flock, and any ones that aren't have to be yours. I can't keep them. Sounds like a great plan. Laban says, certainly. But then see what happens. Remember, this is the trickster by nature and the trickster by nature. See what happens. Laban said, verse 34, good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. So what does Laban do? He says, oh, this is a good plan. I like your idea. Any sheep or goats that are speckled or spotted or black, they're your property. But before Jacob can have the opportunity to go and pull those out of Laban's flock, Laban sends his sons out to gather all of those and to take them a 3 days' journey away. Said, we're going to get them out of here. So all the sheep and goats that Jacob is going to work with for the next little while, none of them are speckled or spotted or black. So there'll be nothing there that he can start with, and the likelihood of the ones left being speckled or spotted or black is going to be very, very low, slim or nil. So he agrees to the plan, and then he uses deception. Because he doesn't want to give up anything to Jacob. Then we see in verse 37, we have this interesting story of something Jacob does. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees, and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks and the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink, And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black and the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So we have this story of how the two of them are trying to out-manipulate each other. So Laban tries to take away all the sheep that would fall as wages for Jacob. Jacob tries to manipulate the sheep so that more of them are spotted or speckled or black. And then he even tries to physically control how breeding is going to ensure that the stronger ones are breeding and not the weaker ones. And then when ones are born that are spotted or speckled or black, now he's carefully taking them away and he's putting them in a place that Laban can't see. So Laban's got his secret flock and Jacob's got his secret flock. And in the middle, there is the flock that supposedly they are using to determine eventual wages for Jacob. But both of them are trying to be at work, trying to deceive the other. But there's one that is at work that is greater than all the rest. This is where we see that it's not Jacob's cunning, but God's promise at work. He had made a promise to him as Jacob lay with his head on a stone laying in the dust when God appeared to him in a dream in the night when he was fleeing from his brother, going to his relatives in a far-off land. And God promised to sustain him, to provide for him, to bless him. And Jacob said, Lord, if you meet my needs like you promised, if you provide for me, then I will serve you. You will be my God. So it is not because of Jacob's cunning, but because of God's promise that Laban's deception fails. It is not because of the various things that Jacob tries to do to manipulate the flock, to try to get them to only have offspring of the kind that he gets to keep. It's not his manipulation, but it's God's promise that makes this happen. Too often, we look at circumstances and we negate the fact that there is a God at work. Even in the difficult things, who is still at work, who is able to keep his promises, even when man is trying to do everything himself to either go against the promise or try to shape the promise in his own mindset or under his own means or at his own timeline. God's promise is at work. This is important as we move forward because it is God that is building up Jacob. It is God that is preparing him and providing him the means to sustain a household, to be able to sustain a clan, to be able to grow into the company that it will need to be as it moves into Egypt, to be able to become the nation that will come out of Egypt, that will travel through the wilderness. Because God has a promise. He made it to Jacob, and even if right now Jacob's lost sight of that promise, right now Jacob thinks it's dependent on himself to out-manipulate Laban, God is the one keeping his promise. We're seeing this is all leading to a point where we will see Jacob have his second major encounter with God. We're heading to that. I hope this is an encouragement to you, something to think about. Remember always that God's promise is where we stand. God's promise is what we depend on. It's not on who is the most cunning, who is the best planner, who can best manipulate the circumstances, but it is God's promise. It is God's promise that brought about these offspring. It is God's promise that brings about what we are going to encounter in the chapters ahead. Ultimately, that culminates in the birth of Christ, in his sinless life, in his sacrificial death, in his powerful resurrection, in his call for salvation to anyone who believes on his name. I hope you know Christ, that you know him in his sacrificial death, you know him in his payment for your sins, you know him in the power of his resurrection, and that you stand on his promises day after day after day. No matter what may be happening around in the physical reality of the moment, God's promises are going to be carried out because his plans are never thwarted and he never breaks his word. If this encourages you, share it with somebody else and bless them too. Thank you for being with us, and God bless.